The final battle in the Book of Mormon took place at the Hill Cumorah. It involved over 230,000 casualties. It destroyed the entire Nephite nation and left Moroni completely alone to record the tragic end of his story in the gold plates. After years of wandering, Moroni finally deposited the record in a hill in New York, where Joseph Smith later found and translated them into what is now the Book of Mormon. Today, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints call that hill in New York, where the plates are found, the Hill Cumorah. So it's natural to wonder, where's the rest of the evidence for the Nephite civilization? If the final battle happened right there, surely we would find heaps of archaeological evidence of skeletons, swords, armor, and other remains of the epic battle the Book of Mormon describes. Archaeologists have found limited evidence for other ancient conflicts, such as the famous Trojan War, so surely we could find something at the Hill Cumorah to confirm what the Book of Mormon says. I see this as an opportunity for further scrutiny because the Hill Cumorah is not the only historic battle that scholars have been unable to verify archaeologically, even when we know exactly where to dig. There are multiple factors that professional historians evaluate when trying to determine the historical plausibility of a battle that we don't have arrowheads or bones for. To figure out what we could realistically recover at a historic battle site, such as at the Hill Cumorah battle, we have to seriously consider three things: the location of the battle, the size of the battle, and the limitations of archaeology within those parameters. When we critically look at where the battle took place, how big it was, and what archaeology can tell us from that, I believe the case for the Book of Mormon's final battle looks a lot more realistic. The first thing we need to consider is where the battle actually took place, because we might be looking at the wrong hill. There is a chance that this is not the Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon. Yes, we call it the Hill Cumorah today, and yes, this is where Joseph Smith found the gold plates, but no, this does not necessarily mean that New York is where the Book of Mormon's final battle took place. And here's why. To understand this, we have to carefully distinguish what the Book of Mormon actually says about the Hill Cumorah and what church history says about this hill in New York. The Book of Mormon's Hill Cumorah is where the final Nephite battle took place. It's also where a larger repository of Nephite plates were located, but the Book of Mormon says that after the battle, Moroni fled and wandered for another 30 years before depositing the plates for Joseph Smith to find in New York in the 1820s. So in theory, Moroni could have traveled quite a distance over the course of the years before depositing the plates elsewhere. And what most people don't realize is that Latter-day Saints did not start calling the site in New York Cumorah until 10 years after Joseph first learned about the plates. Beginning in the mid-1830s, early Latter-day Saints such as William W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery started calling the place where the plates had been found the Hill Cumorah. After this, the name Hill Cumorah stuck and soon became a convenient name among the saints for this location. As far as we know, the prophet Joseph Smith himself only associated the hill in New York with the Cumorah in the Book of Mormon towards the end of his life, such as in the 1842 revelation now known as Doctrine and Covenants 128. It's unclear whether the prophet came to use the name Cumorah by revelation or by conveniently accepting a common usage circulating among the early church members. While other accounts indicate that the angel Moroni called the hill in New York Cumorah during the 1820s, those uses are found in later recollections or secondhand statements and therefore should be used cautiously. And on top of all of that, the hill in New York does not fit the description given in the Book of Mormon very well. According to the text of the Book of Mormon, the Hill Cumorah should be located prominently in the land northward, north of a narrow neck, and close to a sea. This has led some scholars to look for other more plausible locations for the final battle, such as in modern-day Mexico, just northwest of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. The church has no official position on the location of the Book of Mormon's Hill Cumorah. In 1993, the secretary to the First Presidency stated that the church emphasizes the doctrinal and historical value of the Book of Mormon, not its geography, while some Latter-day Saints have looked for possible locations and explanations. Because the New York Hill Cumorah does not readily fit the Book of Mormon description of Cumorah, there are no conclusive connections between the Book of Mormon text and any specific site. So if we're expecting to find Nephite bones and artifacts lying around upstate New York, we may want to check our assumptions about the location of the final battle. Second, let's address the size of this battle, because some people have felt that this battle must be fictional because it's just so big. According to the Book of Mormon, the final battle that destroyed the Nephite nation included a seemingly impossible 230,000 casualties. For context, the Battle of Gettysburg claimed around 50,000 casualties. Now, battles in modern times have seen much higher numbers, but still, 230K is a big number in the ancient world. The truth behind this large number may surprise you, but no matter what way you look at it, the best explanations for why there were so many casualties require you to analyze the Book of Mormon the way historians analyze other ancient battles. These are the 4 reasons those casualty numbers may have been so high. First, just take a look at the History Channel website where you can literally see history rewritten in the span of just a few years. As late as 2021, the History Channel was saying that the classic Maya population was maybe around 2 million. But then as more LiDAR studies have come out, they've had to update the article to say, actually, it could have been 10 million. It's becoming increasingly clear that the population of pre-Columbian America was much larger than many people assumed, even larger than Europe during some periods. As far as how this translates to military numbers, The Aztecs reportedly gathered more than 300,000 people for a war against a neighboring kingdom, and this was not even noted as a remarkable event. The Quiche similarly were said to have gathered an army of 232,000 men in the field, even though many refused to fight. So if these reports are accurate, if being a big qualifier here, 230,000 casualties may actually have been a reasonable figure in an ancient American setting. The second point deals with the reality of ancient historical texts. Anyone who has studied ancient history has encountered, well, we'll say really confident claims by the ancient historians. Specifically with military numbers, ancient historians possibly exaggerated. Xenophon, Herodotus, Caesar, all of these guys talk about military numbers that historians today scrutinize with a somewhat skeptical eye. Even the Bible has possibly exaggerated its numbers, such as numbering all of the Israelites who left Egypt being 600,000 males, which would be extraordinary compared to the population Egypt is believed to have had at the time. So it's entirely possible that in recording this battle, Mormon exaggerated. This wouldn't really have been thought of as lying, though. Ancient people just thought differently about history and historical accuracy. Third, it's possible that when the Book of Mormon talks about 10,000, it represents a military unit and not an exact number of soldiers. In Hebrew, the word elef can mean the literal number 1,000, but it can also mean a military squad. In ancient Rome, a century was in theory 100 soldiers, but that often varied to 2. And if that's the case, each military commander could have simply been in charge of 10 squads of unknown numbers, putting the total number of casualties much lower than they might seem at first. Another possibility is that the number 230,000 is not just referring to able-bodied young men, but represents the entire population. The Book of Mormon implies that this battle was pretty much everyone in the Nephite society, and that's a chilling thought. The truth is, we just don't know for sure which of these options is correct, but these are the types of considerations that historians make when assessing similar claims in other ancient texts. The important thing is to keep our options open and to keep searching for truth. The third thing we need to take a careful look at is what we can expect archaeology to tell us about battle evidence, like bones, swords, and armor. The murder of Parley P. Pratt is actually a perfect example of why no one's ever found bones, swords, or other archaeological evidence for the final Hill Cumorah battle in the Book of Mormon. Since this final Nephite battle had thousands of casualties, it's natural to wonder why we haven't found archaeological evidence for such a massive battle. And we could ask the same question of Parley P. Pratt. Not many Latter-day Saints realize that he was murdered while he was on his mission to the eastern states, and that's a whole nother story. But as he lay dying from this attack, he told a nearby farmer that he wanted to be buried in Utah. Fast forward to 2008, the descendants of Parley P. Pratt located his gravesite in Arkansas and arranged to exhume the grave to transport his remains to Utah. But despite knowing the exact location of the grave, there were no surviving human remains. They had completely decomposed after just 150 years. And this just shows how quickly human remains can disappear even when we know where to look. When it comes to historic battles with lots of people, sometimes archaeologists do find human remains, but this is actually a lot more rare than you would think. At well-known medieval battle sites, archaeologists haven't been able to find human remains. Modern archaeologists have so far drawn a blank in finding human remains at virtually all English and French battlefields of the 14th and 15th centuries. And that's just a few hundred years ago, and we know the location. In ancient Mesoamerica, finding bones is exceptionally rare, and when they are found, they're often in poor condition because of the humid tropical climate. Mesoamericanist Michael Coe worked at a massive Olmec site that was once occupied by tens of thousands of people, and he never found a single human burial. He said given the terrible conditions of bone preservation in the acid soils of the Olmec heartland, it's likely that surviving skeletons would be few and far between. The way that the bodies were handled also matters in preservation. Bodies decompose a lot faster when they're exposed to the elements, and the Book of Mormon seems to imply that these bodies were left out in the open without burial. So finding human evidence of the battle at Cumorah is extremely unlikely, even if we knew where to look, and the reality is, we don't. Scholars have not come to a consensus, and the church does not take a position on the location of any events in the Book of Mormon. But that is all just human remains. At a battle site, could we expect to find evidence of weaponry, like swords? The Book of Mormon says that the Nephites had specifically metal swords, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is one of those anachronisms that archaeology has not attested yet in ancient America. When evaluating an anachronism, sometimes it means we need to be patient with the archaeological record for more things to be discovered, as has happened with other anachronisms. Sometimes it means we should be setting aside some of our more simplistic assumptions about the text and look at the problem more critically and with some more nuance. For example, a close reading of the text will show that while the Book of Mormon mentions swords 156 times, a lot of people are surprised to learn that it specifies metal swords only twice. And I'll get to those two instances in a bit, but all other 154 occurrences of swords could be referring to something else, and I'll show you what I think it is because it also accounts for the staining of the swords that the Ammonites mention. After looking at the text and comparing it with the material culture we have from the New World, it's highly possible that when the Book of Mormon is talking about swords, it's most often referring to this guy, a maquahuitl. It's a deadly weapon with a wooden cord embedded with sharp obsidian blades along the edge. When the Spanish arrived in the New World, when they saw these weapons, they called them swords, and when the Aztecs saw the Spanish swords, they called them metal maquahuitl. So clearly both of these cultures saw a similarity between these two weapons. Unless you think these would just be used as clubs, these things could cut and slice. Mesoamerican codices show images of human heads and limbs being cut off by these weapons, and some Spanish accounts describe the decapitation of horses with them. And this accords well with the Book of Mormon, which describes both arms and heads being sliced off. The composition of the Makwa can account for why we haven't found the many swords that the Book of Mormon talks about at battle sites, because it's made of wood. These weapons broke down so rapidly, almost none survive today, so our knowledge primarily comes from inscriptions, artwork, and colonial accounts. What I love most about this explanation is that it gives the story of the Ammonites burying their weapons a whole new meaning when they say that their swords had become stained with the blood of their brethren, and through the blood of the Son of God, they could become bright once again. Metal swords obviously can be wiped clean, but these weapons would absorb blood in the wood and become permanently stained. So now let's address what those two references to actually metal swords could mean. In the Book of Ether, Shul makes steel swords a few generations after the Jaredite migration from Mesopotamia to the New World. So the early Jaredites were familiar with metalworking, but it's not stated how many steel swords Shul made and whether they were an early anomaly or somehow remained the Norman Jaredite culture. The only other mention of metal swords is the Sword of Laban, which is explicitly said to be steel, but this story takes place in Iron Age Jerusalem, and steel swords have been archaeologically attested in the ancient Near East in Nephi's era. Now, Nephi does take this sword to the New World and even says that he tried to make additional swords after the manner of Laban's sword, but we don't know if this means he forged new metal swords or if he just made it after the same style. And again, like the Jaredites, we don't know if this was an early anomaly in the culture before being overtaken by the Makwa or if this remained the norm in their culture. This does not absolve the need for steel swords in ancient America, but these are important caveats to understand why it might not show prevalently in the archaeological record, since what we know of the archaeological record is like less than 1% of what a society's material culture would have been. And there are other passages that hint at the possibility of other metal swords as well, but again, these can all be interpreted differently depending on the assumptions you're bringing to the text. So the Hill Cumorah, New York may not be the right location for the final battle, and even if we found the right location, there's a good chance that no identifiable remains could be recovered from a battle of that size. So with this in mind, there are two overarching approaches one can take when reading the Book of Mormon. One is to just assume the book's false, stating that every confusing element in the book proves it to be a fraud. The other is to have faith, give the book the benefit of the doubt, look at it through an ancient lens, and realize that ancient texts are rarely as clear-cut as modern readers would prefer. This second approach means that readers of the Book of Mormon need to read it in the same way they would read other ancient sacred texts. They need to be patient with the book, consider it thoughtfully, and not dismiss details that seem strange as a sign that the book's not authentic. If something about the Book of Mormon seems confusing, out of place, or unexpected, this is what one would expect of other ancient texts. This simply means that the Book of Mormon joins the Bible as a book that needs to be pondered and considered carefully if one's to understand some of these strange things in the text. Exploring some of these challenges and their possible solutions, I think, creates opportunities to learn, to grow, to discover, and to ultimately increase in faith. If you want to learn more about any of the topics covered in this video, I've linked to all my sources in the description below. And if you found this content valuable, I would really appreciate your support. Scripture Plus is a product of Scripture Central, and we're a nonprofit organization. We rely entirely on the generous support of donors who believe in the cause that we do, in illuminating and defending divine truth. So if you're able and willing, I'll leave a link in the description where you can donate to Scripture Central.